Welcome back to our second panel. I hope everybody enjoyed their coffee. We're just going to settle back down again, and in a second or two we'll chase the last couple of people in and shut that door. But welcome back to this panel here. I hope we are visible and audible online. If we're not, you'll need to put some comments in the question boxes and colleagues will run round. But I think we have everybody in. So welcome back. Our second panel today is what we are calling socially responsible licensing, or what I would probably have learned to call equitable access with respect to medical applications, healthcare technology. I'm Lisa Cowie. I'm the technical coordinator of the IMPAC3T-IP project. And for this second panel, we may be going to be trying to be too clever, but we'll give it a go. We are going to try and ask you some questions to wake you up. So we're going to try using Slido. If you have a mobile phone, you can please copy that QR code. You can go online, and that way we're going to get a little bit of a feeling for how many people in the panel know a bit about responsible licensing for medical technologies, equitable access. I would say that I came to this very new 2 years ago. I was naive. I've been quite ashamed by how little I knew about this. I don't think I'm alone, so I'm a bit interested to know how many other people in the audience have a bit more background. So can anybody there tell me, do they think that they're now online? Okay, right. Okay, so it looks as if we have quite a lot of people starting to come on here. So before I introduce our panel, what I'm going to do is actually ask you some questions to set the scene. So in particular, we have a speaker. Carmen Correa has come today from the Netherlands to join us. And as some of you may know, the Netherlands has now policy for socially responsible licensing. So if I go to the first question here, I want you to tell me, how many principles are there? How many principles are there for socially responsible licensing in the Netherlands? Do you think there are 5, 10, 15, or 23? How many people are aware of the principles for socially responsible licensing in the Netherlands? Because the Netherlands is one of the few EU member states that now has this written into policy and strategy. So we now have 36, 37 people who have voted on this one. I'll give you another couple of seconds on that one. You can obviously try guessing, but some people may actually know how many this is. That is shaping our background. We've now got 45 out of nearly 51 people. Anybody else want to guess before I bring up the results on this one? I'm going to bring the results up. So most people have guessed 23, which is wrong. There are in fact 10 principles that the Netherlands now have written in for socially responsible licensing in the Netherlands. Designed to ensure that publicly funded innovations, particularly medical technologies, remain accessible, affordable, and beneficial to society. There are key principles which include pricing. So that's my next question. If I can try and bring my next one up here. So of those 10 principles, which one of those explicitly relates to pricing? Do you think it's principle 1, 3, 5, or 10? Where does the principle for pricing sit within the Netherlands' 10 principles? How many people know this and how many people are wildly guessing? I'm looking at people's eyebrows and I'm saying there's some wild guessing going on in the room. But this is the landscape that we might say shapes where Carmen Correa Martin comes from, because Carmen today has joined us from Erasmus MC in the Netherlands, where she has over 20 years of legal experience in the area of technology transfer, intellectual property, and obviously a particular focus on medical technologies. She actually started her career as the legal counsel for Varo Novative, which was a spin-off from Erasmus MC. She has worked at Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York, and she then returned to Rotterdam to take up her position there. And she's also a leading light for LESI in the Benelux, part of the licensing professionals, where she's out there organising workshops, promoting events, and generally being snowed under, as far as I can see. So we've had 40 of 53 people. The answer is it's 10. It's the final one that relates to pricing. And we maybe come back over that one. So let's move on. Let's move on to our next question. Okay, because our second panelist today, Nicolas Tourneau, comes from the Institut Pasteur, which is in Paris, in France. So I want to ask you about Institut Pasteur. Do you think it's a public research organization, government owned and government funded? Do you think it is perhaps a private non-profit foundation? Or do you think that Institut Pasteur is actually private limited liability company? Who knows what the status is of the Institut Pasteur? Again, you can do some wild guessing if you don't know. Came as a bit of a surprise to me when I went out and took a look at this. Nicholas, who joins us today, started his career as a biochemist, but he also has qualifications in business and in industrial property. And I think for over 15 years now, Nicolas has been head of patents and innovations, and he's also the Associate Vice President for Technology Transfer and Industrial Partnerships. He leads a team that manages the IP portfolio, which is 400 patent families. And he's worked on a very broad basis for international litigations and negotiations. So if we come back to Institut Pasteur, most people got that wrong, which I did too. I assumed it was a government organization, government owned and government funded, and it is not. And that's quite important because it doesn't get its money from the public sector. It doesn't get publicly funded. It has to raise its own finance to do its research. And we'll come back to, I think, why for me that is so important. And now we'll see how many medics or otherwise we have in the room. Because I'm bringing up here a list of medical treatments, you might say. And I think I've shown you here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I want you to tell me which one of those is the odd one out. Now, we might have the odd medic in the room who's sitting there going, oh, yes, one of those that has to be kept at 4 degrees Kelvin and all the others can be stored in a fridge. That would be the wrong answer. One of these is not like the others. Do you want to vote on which one of these is not like the others? Because these are all treatments. These are all life-saving treatments. These are treatments that make or break people's lives, which is what is critical in the area of responsible licensing, access to medicines. What have we got here? We've got 35 out of 57. People are still not quite wildly guessing. Have a wild guess. Oh, somebody's just gone off, of course. I'm going to bring that up because we need to move on. So let's have a look at this one. And I am not sure that the answer has gone up there. The answer for these is that 4 out of 5 come from the Institut Pasteur. One of them doesn't. One of them has the letters OX in it. And it comes from a different vaccine group at a different UK-based university, somewhere in the Midlands in the UK. Everything else comes from the research of the Institut Pasteur, which is the organization that Nicolas joins us from today. Okay, so our third speaker today, our third panelist, is Andy Goldman. Andy is from the MPP, the Medicines Patent Pool. So let's have a quick look at how much you know about the Medicines Patent Pool. Right, so I'm going to go back to 2024 and I want to know, I'm assuming everybody knows a little bit about who and what the medicines patent pool are. But as of 2024, how many agreements had the medicines patent pool signed with patent holders for healthcare technologies? Do you think the answer to that question is less than 10? 22? 54? Or over 100? How many technologies do we have out there that the medicines patent pool that handles these pools of medical technologies, which they will then license to people to bring them very specifically to low and middle income countries? How many do you think that they were handling at the end of 2024? Some more wild guesses going on? Forty-three of 57 people have responded. Let's have a look. Right. So most people think it's well over 100. 44% here think that it's over 100. It isn't, it's 22. Which also came as a shock to me too. It's actually quite a low number. But if we move on from that question, well, I tell you in a moment a bit about Andy himself. Based on those 22, how many doses of treatment have generic manufacturers signed to lower and middle income countries, LMCs? Less than 1 billion? Around 5 billion? Over 15 billion? Or over 43 billion doses based on those 22 agreements? And while you have some wild guesses about that, I will just thank Andy Goldman for coming in. He's flown in from the US to join us, although the MPP is obviously Swiss-based NGO. And he works very much on what we would call upstream access. He works a lot with universities, early stage technologies, trying to help people to understand how they can put their medicine into the medicines patent pool, how they can make it more affordable and accessible, how they can sign licensing deals that mean that their medical technology is available to everybody who needs it and not just those who can afford, because that's what's behind this next panel that we're doing. So he's currently consulting as well to GARDP. He's had a lot of advisory roles for different organizations, and I've been extremely grateful to him because, as well with our other two panelists, they have over the last 2 years guided me through what was a very new area. So I'm grateful to Andy for everything that he's done for our project over the last 2 years, along with Nicola and Carmen. So let's come back to that question. So through these 22 licenses, do you think in terms of the number of doses that have been supplied, it's less than 1 billion, nearly 5 billion, over 15 or over 43? Right, well on this one, most people said that it was probably about over 15 billion. Again, everybody is wrong. 24% of the people in the room have got that right. The answer is that it is over 43 billion. That's been the impact, that's been the role of the medicines patent pool in helping to bring medical technology to a wider audience. So let's have a little bit of a talk with our panel now. I'm going to start with Carmen on this one. Carmen, if I may, that the Netherlands is one of the very few EU member states that has this national level policy, these 10 principles. How is this changing and shaping the landscape in the Netherlands for universities with regard to research centres and technology? Is this an important driver for you, really?
I think it have improved how we license to the industry. But I think at the end, this is not new. I think it was kind of institutionalized, if you want, but there is a predecessor to this that basically is the same, except for the principle number 10 that have a geopolitical implications. And I think it comes from the desire of the Dutch government and the Dutch society to look into the pricing of medication. But the principles are nothing new. There was already from Atom back, I don't know how many years now, but I think at least 16 or more years, something that was called the 9 points to consider in licensing. And basically it repeats those 10 principles except for the pricing one. I think the pricing for us is very, very difficult because technologies are very early stage. We are lucky if we find a licensee, and then on top of that, we need to discuss pricing with them. It becomes almost impossible. In that, the affordable access plan of MPP has come helpful, not because it touched upon the pricing, but about access. But we have used to accommodate that language also to incorporate language on the pricing. So it have helps to bring the discussion into the table, in some cases successfully, in some cases not, but at least it's a start of rolling a discussion on how access should be taken care of by the industry.
Can you say a bit more about what the pricing issue is and how the 10th principle is trying to address it? What is the issue with pricing?
Yeah, well, there have been a lot of critics for medications like Genzyme for Pompe disease that is very expensive, or for Lutathera, and both were developed by Erasmus MC. And that created discussion at the political level for the complaints of the society that the prices of medications are prohibited. I particularly found it a strange discussion. Coming from Latin America, sometimes I see that medication in Latin America is more expensive than in the Netherlands, but it is a discussion that creates a debate where the governments push universities to, you need to figure it out how you are the one of the drivers of licenses that are the products that end up in the market. How come there are such a huge prices and you do nothing? Well, we could not. I think the regulatory have more to do. But due to that debate, this principle ended up in the communication, and it's established at a national level by the UMCNL, formerly NFU, the Dutch Federation of Universities, and it's a guideline. It's not per se a rule, but I think every university in the Netherlands will look at them.
So if I understand correctly, originally you licensed your medical technology to a company who then decided what the pricing would be. And are the principals now saying that the university, as part of that licensing deal, ought to also be saying something about the pricing?
Well, I think it's very difficult for us to say something about the pricing. I think what we try to suggest is that the company have to have a clear transparency in how they build the price. They should discuss with the regulatory authorities how that pricing should be affordable, whatever that means, to the society.
Okay, so the issue of affordability comes in. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. Nicola, can I turn to you then? Thank you for joining us. Because I know that Institut Pasteur, which is not a government-funded research organisation, it has a hugely long tradition of supporting equitable access and responsible licensing. I mean, is that based on having a strong internal policy? Is that critical for an organisation, or do other approaches work?
Well, we don't, as of today, we don't have a corporate, finalized, validated policy on these matters. Why? Because it is tricky, and it has to be, it's a lot of work, and you have to get the direction at the upper level, and even the board of directors approve it, if you want really to make it a policy. And there is a difference in between what so-called policies that are published on websites of TTOs, universities, and so on, that are not really policies, that are just kind of marketing statements. Although there are a lot of good intentions, of course, we all have very good intentions, but there is a difference in between showing up in a website something and having a real policy. And policies are tricky, because you have to find the proper balance in between, promoting equitable access, promoting fair licensing, and so on. But you also have to provide what some of universities or TTO are expected to do, which is to generate products and revenues and so on. So there is a fine balance and fine tuning to do. So I would say that the policy is useful. so long as this is worked at the upper level and really aligned with the mission of the institution. We all have several kind of slightly different mission in between education, health services sometimes, research, of course, and then innovation. We hope we don't have the same mission, in fact. So we have to align a policy with our mission. So what is important is basically to practice equitable access as much as possible, or promote, act on it. For example, there is something that we did during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. 2 weeks after the publication of the sequence of the nCoV 2019, we didn't know what it was really. And so we identified in 2 days, basically, that was the SARS-CoV-2. We call it 2 because we know it was very similar to the N protein. So that was the 2. And so because we have a center of national reference center in this area, in coronavirus and influenza, we had the experience on how to detect and PCR amplify and detect SARS-CoV-1. So we applied this knowledge. We got the sequence and we published it as a WHO reference center. So we published the sequence, the probes and whatever is necessary in 2 weeks. Available for everyone, no patent, no license, and use it. Please use it. It's a matter of global health, and so that's the response of the pandemic. So this is something that you can practice, basically. You can decide, I make it available, and publication is the best way to do it. So that's the thing. And of course, so we are practicing also in some licensing agreements, some specific clauses applied for low and middle income countries. Sometimes it can be free. Sometimes it's just a very small number. A small number can have an interest compared to free because it allows us to really make sure, because they have to declare what they are doing, how much they are selling. So there is an advantage. You know, it's a fine balance in between. Don't think free is better. I mean, 1 cent euro could be even better than free because then you can control what's going on in different countries. So yeah, you can practice. You can carve out some countries. You be careful about exclusivity. Really, that's something that industry likes to take, exclusive license on new techs, just because sometimes it is defensive. They're going to put it on the shelf for whatever reason, and then they do nothing. They don't invest, they don't develop, they're not serious. So, and this is really difficult to undo. Exclusivity, once you've signed it, to undo it, it's just like a nightmare. So performance clauses, how do you define performance? I mean, so non-exclusivity is something good. And so it's really a case-to-case basis. So when you draft a policy, I'm working on it at the moment. So when you draft a policy, you have to really think about all of this before you put on the stone some principles that may not really fit or that may impedes your freedom to make deals on a case-to-case basis, which depends on what types of technology. Is it low tech, deep tech? Is it expensive? Is it affordable? And so on. So that's my suggestion.
And I found this really interesting when we were talking earlier of the year, when universities would say to me, well, we don't have a policy. And my feeling was that it seemed to be less about policy and more understanding practice, so you could bring it to the individual cases and do it in different ways. If I come then to Andy, if I may, at this point, because again, when I was talking to different groups, I was talking a lot to USA universities because they seem to be more in advance than the European ones. And quite a number of them said, well, it's got much easier for us since we had the AAP.
And I said, just remind me what the AAP is. And they said, well, the Affordable Access Plan that came from the Medicines Patent Pool. So, Andy, can I come to you at this point and get you to talk a bit about what is the AAP and why do universities feel this has been such a help to them?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here. Let me, if I could just back up, because you asked if, you sort of assumed that people in the room knew what Medicines Patent Pool was, but I don't know that that's true. I'm just sort of curious if you have ever heard of Medicines Patent Pool, could you raise your hand? Okay, so maybe about half. Okay, so let me just explain what the Medicines Patent Pool is. It was a Swiss foundation NGO built to work on increasing affordable access to medical technologies in low and middle income countries. So specifically, our mandate is focused on low and middle income countries. All of the issues of high drug prices in Europe or the United States or Japan, many of us are well aware of that, but that's not our focus. We were built by Unitaid. Unitaid was the organization that created us, which was at the time part of the WHO. And so everything that we do with licensing and technology transfer as sort of the mechanism of how we do it is with public health in low and middle income countries in mind. We're constantly, we understand the realities of, the commercial needs of our partners when we're in licensing, but we're constantly focused on trying to improve outcomes in low and middle income countries. And the pricing issue that we talked about and that you led in with is really important. Access to affordable medicines in low and middle income countries is horrific on the whole. It is really bad. Over 2 billion people in the world, primarily in low and middle income countries, lack access to affordable medicines. And if you look at the disease burdens, pick your disease, it is almost always far worse in low and middle income countries. So that's the reality. That's cancer, that's communicable diseases like HIV and hepatitis C and tuberculosis. It's non-communicable diseases like, heart issues. And so if most of our work has been in licensing finished products from the pharmaceutical industry, most of our early work was for HIV. That was where we were initially built to do, and it expanded over time to include hepatitis C and tuberculosis, and now we're basically disease agnostic. What we work on, our prioritization is what is responsible for the figure that you put up about, doses of treatment that are provided in the world. But we are not a developer. We don't in-license so that we can develop things. We're not a funder. So many of you would probably come up to me and say, hey, we have a product, can you take it? The challenge for us is that we are not built that way. We're built to license and to move things and to help impact through licensing. So that's that reality of like this gap between the challenges that universities and research institutes face versus, taking things from there to market. It was an area where we recognized there's something else that needs to happen here. There needs to be more attention to these issues of affordable access and the role that universities can play and other research institutes can play and funders can play, governments can play in trying to narrow the time between when something comes to market in a high income market like Europe here, right, versus low and middle income countries. And so UCLA approached us in about 2020, I think it was, or maybe 2019 even. My memory tells me that it was actually before the pandemic because I remember it as a happy time. And they came to us specifically about this. They were under pressure because they had, at the time, a prostate cancer medicine that they developed on campus and out-licensed it to a company that was acquired by Pfizer. And fast forward down the line, that medicine turns out to be incredibly important. It's on the WHO essential medicines list, and there's issues of high pricing in the United States, so it becomes kind of a poster child for all the problems that we're well aware of, as well as access problems in low and middle income countries. So the university was taking a lot of pressure about this. And so they reached out to us and said, okay, what can we do better? And they showed us their license template. And it had what I think many universities have in their templates, which is sort of like or at the time, it's improving, but a sort of wishy-washy language about access, about recognizing access in low and middle income countries is important, and the parties will kind of do what they can, right? And that was it. And so it's not surprising when you have language like that, that nothing happens, and then you run into these problems. There's nothing that you can do to tell the licensee that they have to do X, Y, or Z, right? And but the challenge is exactly what Nicola and Carmen have talked about. You can't, in most cases, you know, if a university is licensing an early stage technology, the leverage it has to impose terms on a partner are pretty low. That's the reality that when we speak to universities, that we hear all the time. Many of them say, oh, we totally understand the problems of access. You know, we get it. This is bad. But what are we going to do? We can't tell them you must price this cancer product or like this thing that will be developed into a potentially useful cancer product at cost of goods. Like that's a non-starter. And so how do you actually figure out a way to meet universities where they are realistically with what they have to deal with industry partners while also trying to advance access? And so this clause, this affordable access plan provision that we developed with them was an attempt to do exactly that. And it's very simple. And it has predecessors from the Gates access language, which every funded product from Gates has to abide by, and other things like that, which basically says that the licensed product, not the individual patent, because maybe the individual patent is not itself going to be the most important part of this, right? Maybe it's like an mRNA vaccine where it's all about know-how and not about patents. But the licensed product of this, when it is about to be brought to market, when it achieves regulatory approval, the licensee has to submit back its plan for how it's going to achieve affordable access in low and middle income countries, strategies and timelines. But it doesn't say you must price at X, you must price at cost of goods. It doesn't say you must license to the medicines patent pool. It doesn't say anything other than you have to put forward your plan. So it's trying to recognize, you know, what the reaction would be from industry partners about this. It's intentionally very open and non-prescriptive. And I mean, it's fundamentally that simple. The language is up on the Medicines Patent Pool website. It's on the UC Berkeley website. UC Berkeley picked this up after UCLA. Columbia University is starting to do it as of a few years ago. University of Michigan, Erasmus Medical College is doing it. University of the Amsterdam Medical College is doing it. There's a list of universities that have started to try this because they recognize that for these early stage technologies, particularly when you're talking about products that have a market in high income countries or might have a market in high income countries, that this may help move things a little bit. It's not necessarily the right clause for every situation. There's going to be situations like Nicola has talked about where you want a very different approach, that you should be making things open and available, or if something has gone further into clinical trials and the government has put money behind it, and where you have a different degree of leverage, different approaches, different clauses can be very useful. But for this early stage scenario where leverage is low and something might be relevant and they may want to or may need to retain the market in high income countries, this is, I think, an interesting innovation. That's what sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, that was really helpful. I mean, I think what I found particularly interesting about this is that it does kick in at the point of regulatory approval. So you aren't having to fight over the license at the point where the company doesn't even know if it's going to make it through regulatory approval. That's the point where they have to agree to this. And it's not coming in and saying, this is what you have to do with pricing. This is what you have to achieve. So it felt like I don't like using the word compromise, but it did feel like a win-win for the companies down the line. Thank you, Andy. Nicola, I want to come back to you again on the basis of a conversation that we've had over the course of the year. Within our IMPAC3T-IP Toolbox, we focus really strongly on how you can structure licensing agreements and clauses. But in the experience of the Institut Pasteur in France, are there other ways of transferring technology that would lead to a more equitable world?
There are many ways, different ways. One of which is important is to consider build up exchanges of know-how, do some real world tech transfer. Take, for example, a group of experts in your university. They are very good at that. They've developed this technology, and this is useful, for example, in some countries in Africa, or because what you want to do is to transfer the know-how, the knowledge, the technology to people locally, regionally, so that they can do it themselves. And that is one particularity of Institut Pasteur, because we have the chance to have some small Institut Pasteur all around the world, so we can do that. But we also can go, you know, in India, in other, whoever is asking, we can provide this. We can really transfer the biological materials, the antibodies, and so on, to make the antibodies locally. And I think that this is a type of tech transfer that we don't think about, but it's quite interesting and relevant. And it's so nice, I mean, to see some of our scientists going into these countries and participating in the build-ups, or in preparedness, or in helping. For example, in the Ebola crisis, we sent some of our. We have a special team. I mean, I have so much admiration, because they go there underground with their suits, because they are trained to do that in P3 and in P4. And they set up like a truck, a P4 or P3, P4 truck. They built one, and they put it on the ground, and they can. So this is something, and they train the people locally. So this is something very important, I would say, and part of it.
So if I understand correctly, this is to an extent about knowledge transfer and capacity building and training for people, which I think, again, is a really interesting point, because when we have talked about compulsory licensing, where you have to license a patent, quite a lot of people have said, well, it's not actually very effective. It doesn't work because you don't have the knowledge to do it. Whereas if I understand correctly, partly because you have the institutes in many places, you are in a position to do the capacity building, to transfer the knowledge so people can then use the innovations. Right, thank you. Interesting. Carmen, I was going to come to you, but you've taken the microphone. Do you want to respond on either of the questions, or can I put another question?
Yeah, I can. I think capacity building is one of the important issues. We also have, during the Ebola crisis, there were our researchers were traveling to train people to handle the situation. It also, we have programs where we have helping capacity building in Bangladesh with a regular program through the Bioscience Department. That's an important matter, but I think we started a lot with the pricing. I think at the end, what you want to create social impact is that the technology rolls out. The pricing is secondary to me. And I think one of the advantage of the Affordable Access Plan, that is not about whether the prices is high or low, is how do we get to places where it needed. So for companies, many times going to those countries is not attractive for many reasons. And prices is maybe one of them, but regulatory issues is another. Access to how distributed they are and so on. Medicine patent pools bring a bridge in which they licensing technology and they license it to local producers. Then the technology, it gets embedded in those countries, that builds in not only the capacity, but also provides that the product is out there. At the end, where the prices got diluted or not in the process, I think is not so important as to have access to the medication there. That's one. And the other is what Nicolas mentioned before about the non-exclusivity. Yes, exclusivity sometimes is necessary, and the whole patent system creates a sort of acceptable monopoly in one way, but there are many ways to also facilitate, for certain technologies, the policy may be non-exclusive licensing to facilitate that there are different alternatives out there that drive pricings also, or specific approaches and that can facilitate, while it's exclusive from one approach, may not may allow others to come in as well. So I think it's important to try to evaluate if the technology really needs an exclusive license.
I'm going to hang on to the microphone for a bit longer because you're talking about now very specific approaches, things that a lot of people just won't have heard about. And if you are somebody in a tech transfer office that attends licensing masterclasses, I think they aren't going into this either. This is very specific. So I start with a question to you, although I'd say other people might want to raise this. How can universities, research institutes that haven't been doing equitable access build the capacity to understand what the issues are and how different organizations have approached them? Where do you get the capacity building for equitable access? Where would you go?
Networking, ASTP, LES,
Okay.
Atom, these events.
Okay. And does it also come from doing things like working with the MPP? Is that something where you would also get support if you wanted to come to them to ask for help?
Yes, I think if we discuss the language on accessible access plan and we see problems, we can reach out to facilitate a discussion on, and also for them, it's good to have the feedback so that they can upgrade the classes.
Okay, all right, then thank you. Andy, I'm going to come back to you because a lot of people I've talked to who seem to feel either you do a commercial deal or you do a responsible, equitable access deal. What's your take on that? Does it have to be one or the other? What should be the approach?
Yeah, I find that the dichotomy weird. Because I mean, I think there are probably there are some clear instances, and Nicola has mentioned some of them already, right? Where maybe you're in the pandemic, right? Or maybe it's Ebola, or maybe there's something that truly is like an acute crisis, right? Where access is the reason why you are doing something, and the commercial aspects are kind of secondary, right? It's like it's almost the ideal in some ways, right? But that isn't everything. I think the reality is that many situations arise where there's a technology which has obvious or likely commercial application, and sometimes it might be a potential blockbuster. Who knows, right? I mean, I just keep coming back to cancer because the problems are so enormous all over the place, right? I mean, it's not just it's bad, very bad, like I said, in low and middle income countries, but everyone knows someone who's had cancer, right? So in that situation, you're talking about what may appear to some people to be a purely commercial deal. I don't think that's the right way to think about it. I think you need to think holistically about these things, right? And it comes back to some of the things we've talked about social impact or societal impact, right? I mean, when you're in socially responsible licensing, you're doing something, you have to recognize where you are in your negotiation, right? You want to get this done. You want to move it out of the university. Ideally, it makes money, but also access is a really important part of this. And the failures of everyone, and I'm not pointing fingers at just universities, right? Because it goes well beyond that. Universities, governments, there's all kinds of people in the ecosystem have a part to play in this. But access, first of all, I mean, from a public health perspective, it's horrific, as I said, right? The lack of equity in terms of access to affordable medicines is a major problem. But also, I mean, one of the other things that the ways that you can think about this is like, these are in some situations that are not the acute situations like Ebola or pandemics or whatever. You can think about markets and the historic sort of timidity of companies and others to think about low and middle income countries as expanded market opportunity because they just maybe don't know about things like the medicines patent pool, or they don't know, like, okay, there are other things that you can be doing to improve outcomes there. So I mean, to me, I think this has to be thought of holistically. I don't think you divide deals by what is commercial and what is just an access deal. I think the way that you are going to improve outcomes and make social impact and have socially responsible licensing is by thinking about these things together. How do you actually allow a company to go out and make money and also be thinking about access in low and middle income countries?
Thank you. I'm going to leave an opportunity for members of the audience to ask questions of our panel. While you get your questions together, I have another question for you, actually. I want to know how many people in the audience think that equitable or socially responsible access should be a requirement for publicly funded research. Do you think it should or not? Because I've talked with quite a lot of funding agencies and I've said, well, why don't you make it a requirement of the funding? And they say, oh, well, you know, we think that the grantee or the organization should have to be responsible. We don't want to get involved in this. We aren't going to push this. And then the organization will say, well, you know, it's all very difficult and we do what we can, but we don't have much leverage. I'm wondering, yeah, the majority of the people in the room think that it should be, not everybody, but most people. The other issue that we faced, and again, I'll come to the question on that, I've asked universities, do you report on this? Because it's a requirement that goes into the University of the Line for Essential Medicine. Their request is that you should be reporting annually on how many deals, the size of the deals, who you've done them with. So you actually say, this is what we've done. Do you think that, again, public research organizations should have to report on this? Do you think it should be transparent, what you're doing? Slightly more mixed over the yes or the no on that one. Okay. I think that's an interesting point. What I'm going to do then is say, does anybody want to ask a direct question to all or one of our panel from something about what their organization does or what your organization could be doing if it wanted to strengthen responsible licensing, responsible access? Colleague from Portugal.
Hello. So I have probably a direct question for Nicholas, which is, so I'm trying to study as a role model for our Center of Excellence, the Institute Pasteur. And so as a financial sustainability point of view, do you think or do you know if revenue streams for Pasteur, how much do you generate from your licensing of IP? And what other sources of funding or revenue streams are you trying to use? So it's only focused on patents, because normally we focus IP only on patents and there's a bunch of things. So try to understand a little bit what will be the revenue streams for Pasteur.
That's a brilliant question. How do you pay for this?
We are struggling so much. I'm tired. No, really, it's tough. It's tough. We had the chance that basically it was so much embedded in the mission of Louis Pasteur. Basically, he did the first tech transfer with the fermentation of the beer, a first deal kind of with Carlsberg company, of the beer company, and they funded, but they joined the funding of Pasteur. So it's embedded. So, and we had the chance to get and get really Princeps dominant patents 40 years ago, then again 30 years ago, then again 20 years ago, and that has generated, I mean, some good years, 30 million, 40 millions in licensing revenue, which is like huge. In fact, if we benchmark, it's a chance. It's the cherry on the cake. You need to get lucky, and it gets very competitive today, which is that 20 or 30 years ago, you could do it as in a university because you were exploring like biotech. You can, make a therapeutic monoclonal antibody. That was not that difficult. Today, I would say that it's getting very tough because competition is there with startup, mid-tech, big tech, Asia, US, whatever. It's so the landscape is very hard. And so, yeah, to keep this going, it's just very challenging. The responses we have, and it's linked to basically your ability to do some equitable access deal or ability to really have a position on the table of negotiation. The key thing, and I hope that the EC Commission is listening to me, is to go further. Like Carmen is saying, it's exactly the case. I mean, we are generating inventions. We can pass and put some little money to go to TRL 2, 3, 4, whatever you can name it. It doesn't really mean anything in the way that there is so much investment required, expertise requires, gap to go to the invention to an actual product with a market authorization, that if academic research institutions and university are not able to, at one point, for selected projects which are validated, expertised, to go further into development, we will stay in the situation where we are today. We don't have our say when we are negotiating. On the contrary, if we do preclinical developments, if we scale up, we try and yeah, we can file some additional patents application. I mean, it's a fight. Let's face it, it's a fight. At one point, you need to have the first, the second, and the third patents to keep this going for. And so, if we would have more dedicated special fund to go further, we would do equitable access deal, because we would have, not only we would bring products, we will really help bring new products to products that are not sometimes interesting profit companies. They don't do it because they don't see like the margins or whatever. So if we can do it, we demonstrate that this pass preclinical, we do a first GMP batch, and then why not going into phase 1 or phase 1-2? Why not? I mean, and that would really make a difference. So of course, in terms of financing, we are talking about like millions, like 2 million, 5 million, and you go to the next step, 10 million. But we need to get these funds. So it has to be very, worked in details, very, it needs to, I mean, if this is financed by EC. And we are starting to see, in fact, more and more of these big programs in the vaccine field, for example, because this is essential. Who wants to make a vaccine on chikungunya today? I mean, if you don't have public financing, EC financing, no industry is going to do it. So we are relying on the CEPI coalition, on EVI, on European Vaccine Hub, and if this is essential. And so it's essential for vaccine, but it could be essential for diagnosis, affordable diagnosis. It could be, for cancer. So I would really entice and suggest that this is something really that Europe now focus on, and it would help European industry, by the way.
So we have an appeal for specialised funding, I think, coming out from that one.
Can I add more questions?
Well, I'm going to say, does anybody else have one?
Yeah, of course.
I know Girish does at the back, but you're on our team. You have to wait. Is anybody else who's not on our team? Okay, Girish, go for it. And then I think the panel will be around for a while. So I would also say, please come and talk to people over lunch and take contact details. Girish, wait for the microphone just because everybody can hear you online if you do that. Great.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this wonderful session. I had basically two questions, one for Andrew and one for Nicholas. Nicholas, you just right now spoke about funding, and we only spoke about drugs going to low and middle income countries. But do this low and middle income countries funding 1 million euros for a drug is pretty simple. When I think about India or Bangladesh or even Pakistan or all this subcontinental countries, is there funding coming from low and middle income countries to do research, per se funding for your organizations or any other organizations per se? This was one of the questions. Is there reciprocal arrangement? Is there something happening on that concern? And the second question was, Andrew, I just went through the medicine patent pool and I saw around 22, as you mentioned, drugs being kind of licensed through the MPP. And I saw universities, I just saw University of Liverpool. So per se, I don't see a lot of license happening from the university front. And the second question, and complementarily, how do organizations choose a drug to go through this route? Say Pfizer or most of these companies might have thousands of drugs, but they license one or two drugs. How are these choices made? Which one to go?
By the medicines patent pool?
Through the medicine patent pool, or per se, even for Nicholas, anyone can answer.
So yes. So the reason why you don't see many universities there as the licensors licensing to the medicines patent pool is what I said earlier. Most universities are looking for someone to take it and continue development, right? Or they're looking for money to continue work, as Nicolas said, right? So, I mean, that's just not what we are built to do. We're not a funder. We're not a developer, right? There are a few instances where we do have licenses from universities for technologies that were earlier in the stages of development, but those are, they're the anomaly, right? I mean, and those are University of Liverpool, University of Washington, and MedIncel were sort of this trio of licenses at the same time that came from a project that was funded by Unitaid. As I mentioned, Unitaid is a major public health funder, where the idea was to pair certain technologies from these universities with existing licenses that the Medicines Patent Pool has for specific diseases, for HIV and hepatitis C and tuberculosis, in order to create long-acting versions of those products, right? But that's a very different situation, and it's kind of an ideal situation, honestly, where you have a funder giving money to a university and saying, we want this to happen. Also, we see that there is a path to improved access by you doing X, Y, or Z. And in this case, the sort of behind the scenes bit here was they would license to the Medicines Patent Pool, right? But that's not the norm. That's not our normal way of being. Our normal modus operandi is that we have historically licensed finished products. It's just the smoother path for how we were built. So your second question for me was about how companies choose to license the things that they license to the Medicines Patent Pool. So I'm going to flip it around a little bit. We have a prioritization framework, and all of this is up on our website, medicinespatentpool.org, of how Medicines Patent Pool selects the products that it wants to focus on. And it's a really extensive analysis of, you know, what is the patent landscape? What are the public health needs? Like, what is the potential impact? So, like, how many people have the disease that would be treated by a certain thing? It's a very elaborate framework, and it looks across a lot of different diseases and starts trying to track things, I believe, at phase 2. And so then, you know, we're tracking, and then it's a process of engaging companies, because these are voluntary licenses. They're not compulsory licenses, as Lisa mentioned earlier. So we have to engage the companies, and we have to get them to see the benefit for licensing something to the Medicines Patent Pool. So we have that sort of extensive negotiation, and out of those, it's sort of, you could see the funnel getting smaller, and then you get the ones that actually come through the Medicines Patent Pool. So, and the other questions for Nicolas.
Well, for the second question of financing grants and participating into grants, yeah, there are some consortium agreements that are multilateral in between co-funded, but let's face it, I mean, one of the major sources of this financing goes to something which is great. I mean, some coalition, multinational coalition based on several preparedness or vaccines or DNDi also is one of them, and that works well. But I haven't seen a lot of financing going back into EU or yeah, I haven't seen that directly, really. But maybe Cameron, have you seen that? No.
No.
Andrew.
So just to more broadly, I mean, historically, I think most of the funding, and it's not enough funding, but the funding for medical research historically has been high-income countries, right? The US and the European Union, by and large, and some from Japan, Korea, right? I mean, it's like mostly that. I'm missing a few. It's changing. I mean, I think there is. So you mentioned India. I was just there in January. There's a tremendous amount of focus right now on converting India from just being a kind of the pharmacy of the world, the generics industry, to creating new products and being originators. And so it's a really interesting moment right now where they're saying, look, we recognize we need to do more. We're going to do more. We're going to change the way that we make things. It also creates an opportunity at an early stage of thinking for India of how it wants to continue focusing on access, right? And India cares a lot. You know, this conversation, this is, my colleague Elena is here, she's right there yep, she waved. We spend all of our time for Medicine's Patent Pool talking about this. And so all over the place. Most of the people that we speak to in Europe and the United States have by and large the same reaction to this. That this is an important topic, but it always has to sort of get through the intellectual hurdle of like, what is this going to mean for deals and like commercializing things? We constantly are trying to bridge that gap, right? But in India, you go and you talk to them and they're just like, yeah, like they get it immediately. And it just tells you like, there's a sort of entrenched way of thinking about these things, which I hope, you know, some of what we've talked about today will help break down that I think you can attack these issues in ways that don't sacrifice the viability of getting, moving something from the university outward or from the research institute outward, can do things that ideally increase the return, et cetera, but also, build access into the way of thinking about these things so that you think holistically about this.
Thank you. I sense this conversation could go on for a lot longer. I also know that lunch is starting and we need to come in back at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I probably am just going to briefly draw your attention to the difference between the first session we had, which was our Classical Plus focus, where we've built a toolkit, the second one, which is our crisis toolkit, and this afternoon when we look at co-creation. That's why there's a 3 in the name of our project. It's IMPAC3 scenarios. And how tough it's been to build a toolkit that looks at the different ones here. And I want to thank our very highly specialised panel for coming in and sharing their experiences today. Nicola, Carmen, Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to come. Thank you all.